I did not want to like the Moog Labyrinth. I didn't even want to do a video where I talked about it, honestly. Part of me was being stubborn. I was digging in my heels, obstinate about not falling for what I saw as Moog's legacy shtick. I felt cold towards them, since the Werkstatt and the Mavis, devices I saw as existing technology repackaged with the Moog name as prestige, meant to capture a consumer market as opposed to a market of serious musicians. I felt like even before the InMusic acquisition, Moog was selling its name more than it was selling any real innovation. Now, under InMusic, I feel like giving Moog attention was like pointing at a particularly well-done taxidermy and saying, hey everybody, look how beautiful the plumage of this bird still is. The fact of the matter is, I didn't come to the Labyrinth with a particularly favorable view of the company. I came to it with a bucket full of bias and presuppositions, personal slights, and professional ennui. But I also didn't want to let go of the relationship with the company, and after some admittedly frustrating back and forth with InMusic, a Labyrinth arrived on my front porch, and I knew I was going to have to make something about it. But before that, I had to work on my feelings. I had to get past my inherent bias and subjective opinions of what the Labyrinth should be, and try to see it through the eyes of someone different than me, and accept the Labyrinth for what it is. I'm glad I did, and now I'm going to explain why. The Moog Labyrinth is the second and only other of the Moog semi-modular sound studio devices that I've used outside the Subharmonicon. I remember being very happy with my time with the Subharmonicon. It is an ingenious and beguiling blend of happy accidents, musical expressiveness, and it had a really beautiful tone. I've never found anything that quite matches it. The Labyrinth promised something not dissimilar. I first heard it in Berlin during the Private Moog concert event featuring the incredible Lisa Belladonna. It was a weird night, starting off with us all signing NDAs to not take photos or film, and ending up with every single person there taking pictures and filming, while the speaker for the night was almost wink, wink, nudge, nudge, encouraging everyone to leak specs of what they saw there. It was weird. Lisa gave myself and Mylar Melodies a little rundown of how the Labyrinth worked there, but I had drank a few too many free whiskey sodas to retain the information in any meaningful way. I knew it was sort of like two touring machines working in concert with each other, and I knew it had a wave folder. And turns out, yeah, that's basically it. But there's a little more nuance to how the sequencers work. There are two 8-step sequencers which can, if you want, be chained into a single 16-step sequencer. Each step in the sequencer has a bit which can be on or off and contain a voltage. These voltages can be quantized or unquantized, and there are enough scales in the device to choose from for a bit of variety, but honestly, I found I only used like 2 or 3. Random voltage generators like touring machines need more than just a major or minor setting, usually to be musical. You need to choose a scale mask or a subset of those notes in the scale, and the Labyrinth has a few that I liked. You can hold down a button marked bit flip, and as the sequencer advances, it will flip any bit it passes while the button is held down. It always turns that bit from on to off or off to on, depending on its original setting, and it also chooses a new voltage for it. In combination with bit flip, you can pretty easily generate a new sequence on the fly and move it into a position that you like. There are also these 2 clever corrupt knobs for each sequencer. Fully counterclockwise, the sequence will always stay put, but as you increase the corruption knob, it starts to flip bits on its own, and fully clockwise, the sequence will constantly mutate on its own, constantly making new sequences. To the right of the sequencer lights is the CV range knob. This adjusts how wide the CV range is for each sequencer. Sequencer 1 is normalized to the pitch of the main audio oscillator and the wave folder amount, and sequencer 2 is normalized to the mod oscillator and the cutoff frequency amount. This inherent cross-patching leads to interesting connective sequences, which becomes even more interesting when you play with the length for each sequence. Having 7 steps on one sequence and 5 on the other leads to really interesting polymeters in both pitch and modulation, which is a really sort of rich and hypnotic experience. One gripe I have is that the range of the CV for these sequences has 2 options, -5 to 5 or 0 to 5. -5 to 5 or bipolar voltage is very odd for pitch, so I changed it to 0 to 5, and when I did that, I felt like I kept wanting more from the sequences, more life, more modulation. I really wish that there was a 0 to 10 voltage option, considering we have a knob to dial in the amount. One of the coolest things for the rhythms is to the right of that, the EG Trig mix knob. It chooses between sequencer 1 or sequencer 2 for what triggers the envelopes, and you can mix them in different amounts. Let's say I have the knob 3/4 of the way towards sequence 1. That means the trigs from sequence 1 will trigger the envelope almost completely full amount, and then sequence 2 will be slightly in there. You'll hear them as a softer trig, and as you move it towards sequence 2, that relationship changes. Directly in the middle, both sequence 1 and sequence 2 will trigger the envelopes fully. This leads to more dynamic sequences because you get soft triggers and you get hard triggers, and the envelopes reciprocate. The Labyrinth claims to be West Coast synthesis, which for Moog means it has a sine wave core for the main oscillator and a wave folder to add harmonics, as opposed to the normal selection of high harmonic subtractive waves. The wave folder pretty much has to be at play to get richness out of the sound, and that's fine. It sounds good. That said, I couldn't help but compare it to the O-Coast from Make Noise, which I feel was able to get more complex tones out of it more easily. Maybe it's a grass is greener thing, I don't know. The filter was a really pleasant surprise for me. It isn't your typical Moog filter in that it doesn't lose bass when the resonance is cranked. I was actually incredibly surprised by this. I thought Moog had one filter design and that was it. You could never get bass with high resonance, but not with this friend, and that is cool. The filter sounds good, the resonance can squelch nicely, but this is again where I wish we had a 0 to 10 voltage option. Both the filter and the wave folder have a sequencer lane assigned to them internally, and sometimes it feels like turning up the knob for this modulation did basically nothing. I would much rather the device give us more extremes and let us dial it in than hold us back for whatever reason. That leads us to what I think is the most important part of a device like this. What is its range? Does it have a sound or a sweet spot? Can it get nasty and huge and then get really small? This is what I'm always looking for when it comes to a performance synthesizer. How far can I go in either direction with them, and how easy is it to get to and from those points? With a sine wave oscillator as its main sound generator, the Labyrinth can get as mellow as you could ever want. The only thing missing to mellow it out even more would be the ability to divide the clock with a knob to slow down the sequence, and a set of envelopes that were attack decay instead of just decay. The wave folder can get big and nasty, and with the filter open all the way, the sound will get really bright and huge. But there's more options when you start to engage the other mixable sources. There's a noise oscillator with a color setting, which sounds great, and then there's the modulation oscillator. The second triangle core oscillator can go from LFO to 1.3 kilohertz, and it can track pitch. It's normalized to ring modulate oscillator 1 and frequency modulate oscillator 1, and you can bring it in as its own sound source too. All of this stuff in concert means you can really destabilize and rip through the main oscillator with FM and noise and audio rate modulation, engage the wave folder for even more scream, and then bring it all back to a sine wave. That's a pretty big range. In between, there are lots of sweet spots. Not as many as I would like, but that's my bias talking. I kept wanting more and more from the Labyrinth. Having spent so many years now with eurorack, I have used everything that the Labyrinth presents in one way or another. Mutable instruments marbles, or music things Turing machines for sequencers, various quantizers with note masking, oscillators that can go from sine wave to brutal wave-folded weapons. Everything here I've used in modules that do this better, with more control, more extreme sound design possibilities, and more patchability. And at first, this really frustrated me. I was like, yes, and? But during the 24 hours I set aside to film with the Labyrinth, I kept coming back to it with a new idea, a new performance or patch concept I wanted to try, finally ending up with my favorite, patching the mod oscillator to the clock and playing it in real time as a weird organic creature through the microcosm. Now, it could be that I'm just terminally microcosm brained, but I really loved this patch. It's important for me to remember as I'm talking to you, to people online, to people that come to me for gear advice, that I'm not the only person out there making music and looking for inspiration in music technology. I remember a lot of people being really excited about the Moog Mavis when it came out, and I started to realize that instead of telling everyone why it sucked, I could just say, hey, this isn't for me, and let them enjoy it. And who knows if one of those people hasn't made the Mavis like a center of an entire EP. I used to cringe when I heard people tell me that they bought all the Moog Sound Studio boxes, because it almost always was in the context of, hey, can you help me learn how to make music with them? I developed this weird sense that Moog had done a better job marketing themselves than they had making instruments that end up in the hands of real musicians. But I've come to believe that that's way too cynical a way of looking at it. Hell, at this point, I would love to get my hands on all of them and see what it's like making music with them. We'll see if Moog wants to talk to me again after this video. The Labyrinth is interesting. It doesn't go as far as I want it to, but that's my perspective, my bias, and I learned to let go and accept the device on its own terms. The sequencer is fun, the filter sounds great, and even though I didn't try this, I would imagine with a sidecar of utility modules, you could get extremely freaky and weird in a good way with it. I personally wish that you didn't have to have a bunch of sidecar modules, but I understand that the size of the device, the profile of it, and probably the cost of it would change quite a bit if they put all the patch points in there that I wanted. All the patches you've heard in here are small parts of 7 musical experiments I've uploaded in full to the second channel, so link in the description and patrons will get the music. That's all I have to say about the Labyrinth. I hope this video was useful to you. Thanks for watching. My name is Jeremy, this is Rhythmic Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.